shoot, I should have reached out to Mr. Shaw. Shoot. How are you? I have to write everything down. Whoops.
Okay. Well, I was looking for the clock. There it is. Hi there. It's time to get this thing started. So my agenda is blank, so I am going to turn it over to Peter and to let him guide us through this process today. Thank you, and thank you, for being here. And we're expecting to be, and I'm going to call to order, and I'm going to do a roll call. But I don't have so my clerk over here will.
Chair Summers.
Here.
Members Keller. Brenneman. Hanson.
Here.
Losi. Taylor.
Here.
Vernig. Alex Johnson II.
Here.
Olson. Here. Novak.
Here.
Bartholomew.
Here.
Kopczynski.
Here.
Bessie Johnson.
Here.
And Smith.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And this is the Budget Committee training that we're going to go through. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So with that, I will give it over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair Summers. Just so you all know, the council, we have been grappling with these sound issues. So you kind of have to pull the microphone right up to your lips. Good afternoon, Budget Committee. I'm grateful that you're here for this session and for your continued interest, specifically for the lay people in the committee, in the stewardship of our city's resources to meet the many demands and priorities of its citizens. We'll have an opportunity this evening to hear about the sources of revenue available to us and about the accounting that helps us manage revenues and expenditures. I also wanted to provide an advanced look at what inflation is doing to us as a business enterprise. But before we start, it's worth reviewing a few important points. First, in accordance with state law, the Budget Committee is comprised of all 7 councilors and an equal number of lay members. In our case, that makes the Budget Committee with 14 members. The council's meeting schedule includes work sessions and meetings, but there's really no legal distinction between the two. According to law, they are both regular meetings of the council. But for the Budget Committee, it's different. State law dictates that only specific things can be talked about in a Budget Committee work session. There can be no deliberation, which means that there can't be discussion about what goes where in the upcoming budget. And it would be premature anyway, as we haven't even started the process. However, we can provide general financial updates and training and talk about hypotheticals all we want. And remember, we have 2 different legislative bodies, the City of Albany and the Albany Revitalization Agency. Therefore, we have 2 different budget committees, but they are comprised of the same people. The development of the city's and ARA's next budget will begin in earnest in January. But before that, the Budget Committee will have a chance to, in September, I believe, and November. And the budget build process will include committee meetings to review the budget between April and July. Many of you know how that process works. And remember, in those meetings, I'll have a chance to present the budget that we've put together. And you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, deliberate, and recommend changes. Inflation is affecting our city now. You all know what the recent figures are. When Holly presented to the council at their last meeting, councilors saw the monthly CPI numbers compared to the numbers same months 1 year ago. The Consumer Price Index, a broad basket of goods and services that's used to track inflation surged 8.6% in May from an 8.3% annual rate in April. Here in your city government, just like in our local businesses, inflation is affecting everything. The cost of works projects performed by us or for us by local contractors as they grapple with increasing costs of labor and materials, those are going up. The cost of service contracts on which we rely heavily are increasing. If you've been to the fuel pump lately, you've seen $5.39 for a gallon of fuel, and even more for diesel, almost double what it was last year. Gasoline prices continued to hit new highs almost daily amid depleted domestic production and Russia's war in Ukraine. Our vehicle use in every department is impacted. In the labor market, the increases we can afford are currently constrained by our budget, our existing budget. However, as we go forward, we lag behind the market among comparable jurisdictions. We'll begin to see the effect in recruiting and retention, and we'll have to catch up, find a way to catch up. The cost of capital is the cost to borrow money, and that's increased. We don't anticipate substantial borrowing, but that nevertheless should be kept in mind. The state shares some of the revenue with local governments, so that component of our budget may keep pace with increasing prices as the state's income tax and fuel revenues increase. However, it's trickier with property tax. Right now, we have a surge in single-family housing prices, but Oregon's measures 5, 47, and 50, as you know, impose property tax limitations. Assessed values and property tax increases are capped, and the only way jurisdictions can keep up with inflation is if enough new properties are sold at prices so far above their tax-limited valuations that they can compensate for all of the others capped by the general ceiling. I don't see that happening, and if inflation continues to run hotter than 3% annually, those limitations will begin to exercise significant negative impacts. Paradoxically, inflation may be good for public pensions. If inflation pushes up interest rates and accelerates wage growth, that could take some of the pressure off of public pension plan performance. Since the Great Recession, pension plans have been steadily lowering their assumed annual return to match the low interest rate environment. Plan actuaries factor that rate in when calculating a government's annual pension bill. Lowering that rate results in a higher bill, as governments have to make up the difference. Rising inflation can result in higher returns from a pension plan's fixed income assets, and the steady investment return from fixed income securities is good to rely on from a planning perspective. Bonds used to be pensions' bread and butter until interest rates began falling in the 1990s. If inflation is sustained, government might stop lowering investment return assumptions and perhaps even start raising them again. That could, and I emphasize could, result in lower pension bills for some governments. Or it could at least slow the pace of raising pension bills. In an economic downturn, which we have not yet seen, but which may be on the horizon, state and federal revenues are often hit hard, which means that intergovernmental aid to local governments may decline. Lastly, keeping things in perspective, the good news and the bad news is that we don't have a sales tax, which is more sensitive to economic cycles. So to sum it all up, just say that inflation creates uncertainty in local government revenue and expenditure forecasts. And this afternoon, you'll hear perspective from our own finance director, Gina Yeager. So at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Yeager unless you have any questions.
I don't. Are there any questions from the group? Seeing none, please take over, Gina.
Excellent. Sometimes the technology gets a little funky. So One of the things Peter had talked about is, the cost of inflation and what that's going to do to the city. One of the things we have to remember, because we're a government, is that even though expenditures may go up, that doesn't mean our revenues are going up. So I wanted to kind of focus on what our revenues were so that, we're bound by those. And so I just wanted to kind of let everybody see what kind of constraints that we have in terms of revenues. So this is budgeting basics for fund accounting and revenue sources. So one of the first things that a lot of people don't understand is the difference between government and for-profit businesses. We aren't here for a profit. We use different accounting methods. One of the things, let's see if I can move that. There we go. So we fall under GASB, which is the Government Accounting Standards Board. They help govern everything that we do, how we report, how we account for everything. And according to GASB, governments serve a broader group of stakeholders. We serve citizens, we serve the elected representatives, bondholders, other people in the financial community. Whereas, a business is a little more limited in, they may have a board, they may have their shareholders, but we have a very broad group of people that we serve. Also, revenues are raised through involuntary taxes. With a business, if you want their product, you can go out and you can purchase that product. Here, we have property taxes. We also have, we have people use our water, they purchase water from us. They don't really have another option. So that's another difference between governments and businesses. We have to monitor our actual compliance with budgeted public policy priorities. We have to have a budget, and we need to stick to that budget. If budgets change, we have to go out for a supplemental budget to change that legally. And then finally, governments exist. We exist much longer than a lot of businesses do. Most governments are not prone to bankruptcy, and we're not going to dissolve. We're here for the long haul. So things are a little bit different in how we have to account for everything that we do. So as defined by OAR, Oregon Administrative Rule, a budgetary fund is a fiscal and accounting entity of self-balancing accounts to record cash and other financial resources, related liabilities, balances, and changes, all segregated for specific regulated activities and objectives. It's an awful lot of words. Basically, it just means that we have different funds that we use to account for monies for different purposes. So, as you see in here, a fund is a bucket of money used for a specific purpose. We have different types of funds here at the city. We have governmental funds, and those are the funds that we use to account for activities that are for the general purpose of the government. You're going to see public safety in there. We have library, planning, municipal court. We also have other ones like our business development. I can't think of what it was called there for a second. Economic development is another one too, but also building grants. We have a lot of different funds. It's our biggest category is the governmental funds. We also have proprietary funds. Those are also sometimes called business type, and those are our water, sewer, stormwater. What also falls under there, under the enterprise funds under the proprietary funds is internal service, which are, well, we'll get to that, but basically it's departments in the city that exist primarily to serve other departments in the city. And then finally, we have the urban renewal or TIF fund that we use. So these are the different buckets that the city has. You've seen this one before. These are the biennial budgeted amounts, original budgeted amounts. We just recently changed those budgeted amounts, but this is what it was when we adopted the budget. You'll see the different groups. There's the enterprise funds. They're the first ones. It's the sewer, water, stormwater, as I said. Special revenue contains everything from streets, parks, grants, risk management, so on, public safety levy. There's the general fund, internal service, urban renewal, debt service, permanent funds, and capital outlay, capital projects fund. So with only a few exceptions, these funds, the revenues in these funds can't be used for another fund's expenditures. A lot of people don't understand that. I think they tend to think of things as being a business, where if I had my own business and I wanted to start building cabinets, I could change to cabinets. In this case, we can't do that. Money is very, very limited on what we can spend it on. So as I said earlier, the governmental funds, they account for the core services and activities of a city government. First one is the general fund, and this is the least restricted. We can use these funds for anything that we wanted to. This is the only fund that all governments are required to have. In our case, this is where we will find, we have an administration. That administration program, we pay like the Economic Improvement District payments that we receive. We collect money on behalf of the ADA, and then we pay out of the administration program. Lynn County, we collect transient lodging taxes for them, and so we will pay them out of this program. We have municipal court. We have planning. The Albany Police Department, the Albany Fire Department, and the library are all programs and departments in the general fund. Revenue sources in the general fund, I have the ones that are the major ones starred. So property taxes don't really account for as much as you would think. And I have a graph that will show that in just a moment. Franchise fees and privilege taxes, we've discussed those in the past. Those are the charges that we assess to companies that want to use the city's rights of way for their own personal business. So, for example, Comcast, Northwest Natural, Republic Services. We have a bunch of telecommunication companies that are wanting to enter into franchise agreements with us. And what they'll do is pay us a percentage of their gross revenues for the privilege of doing business here in the city and using our rights of way to do that business. Intergovernmental can be local, it can be state, it can be federal. In the general fund, we receive state shared revenues. We receive gas taxes, although actually gas taxes go to a different program, different fund nowadays. It used to come into the general fund, but in this last budget cycle, we moved it directly to the streets fund. So we have all the different types of intergovernmental revenues. We have agreements with fire districts. So they enter into an IGA, intergovernmental agreement with us, so that we provide services to them and they pay us for providing those services. We have transfers in, and the reason this one is a big one in the general fund is this is where the public safety levy money comes in. The public safety levy is in a special revenue fund, which we'll come to in just a moment, but we transfer those funds in to the general fund, to the police and fire public safety levy programs, and they go to support those programs. Other ones we have charges for service, which includes ambulance fees, those types of charges, fines, forfeitures, and assessments. Court has some of those. Licenses and fees, you may go to planning and have to pay for some permits. Other resources, there's some like club sales, there's some really minor ones that we just kind of group into other resources. And then we have investment earnings, which are interests that we have on each of the different programs.
Mr. Chairman, may I suggest that we take questions as we go along, because each of these slides may spawn a question in somebody's mind. So if anybody has one, if they would just get your recognition, we'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. I was going to mention that. We will have questions at the end too, but please, I'm an accountant. I tend to drone, maybe get a little technical sometimes. So if you ever have any questions, please let Chair Summers know, and I'd be happy to answer them for you.
So I have a question.
Please.
So can you explain, so over the last couple of years, we received a lot of money from the federal government. Do they go in specific funds or do they go into the general fund?
So
Like ARPA,
if you're
for
talking about the ARPA monies and the CARES funding, we track those in grant funds. at first. So, for example, the ARPA funds. We recently, in our last supplemental budget, we appropriated or got the approval to spend funds in stormwater or sewer.
Right.
I'm sorry, in sewer. And what we had to do is do a transfer from our grants fund
Okay. And
into the sewer fund so that they could spend those monies. Generally, though, we put everything into the grants fund first, just for easier tracking. That way, we can see what comes in, and we can see what goes out.
do a trail. Okay.
Yeah, we have an audit trail. We're not just sending money out to the departments willy nilly. So
And I have a question because we know we're going to use diesel and gasoline in copious amounts because that's what fire and police do. Do we buy that on a bulk market and have storage for that so we're not quite as sensitive to the price fluctuations that we're seeing right now?
the city has a couple different methods of purchasing gas. They can use like their Petro card. We're also part of let me think if I can get this name right, the Lynn Regional Fueling Facility. So there's a facility where we all kind of come together and buy gas in bulk and have it there, and that can be used also.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions right now? None. Seeing none, please.
Okay, as I said, here's the general fund revenues. And this keeps blocking my way. So that red down at the bottom is a property tax. And then next is the franchise fees and privilege taxes, intergovernmental revenues, the transfers in, including the public safety levy, and then other resources. This graph is going to show you how little property tax actually plays in the general fund nowadays. Back in 2017, the property tax as a percentage of total revenue was much higher. And now we're down to about 45%. So that's not even enough really to cover our public safety departments. I did want to touch on those numbers we were looking at before were from fiscal year 21, because that was the last full year that we had. So city services fees were not reflected in that. But I just wanted to give you guys an update on our city services fees. These are reflected through the end of May. We were expecting to receive $5.4 million for the biennium. So far, we've received $2.3 million. And we're short about $164,000 from what we were expecting, but really it's not a horrible amount. And we'll see where we're at once the year ends and we can accrue things back. The low income assistance program, we have provided assistance to the tune of about $8.2 thousand since we started it. That's serving about 200 households.
So are there more people that could be reached through this program, or is that just what's so far that's come in?
So far, that's what's come in. What I'm thinking is that since we didn't really start this program until the December-January timeframe, that 8.2 thousand is a little bit low. I think going forward in the next fiscal year, even if it's the 200 households, we're going to see
An increase?
that'll be an increase.
Okay.
I think it's just we got off to a slow start.
Okay.
Chair, question? Are we seeing any people refusing to pay the city services fee?
I don't know that specifically. I will tell you that when I went to file our tax forms this year to the counties, one of the things we always include are sewer liens, and sewer liens were up substantially. And that could be partly because of the way when somebody pays their water bill, the order that items are paid. So city services fee is up at the list. Sewer is actually the lowest on the list. So if somebody refuses to pay it, it's going to show up as a tax lien for their sewer.
Thank you.
Okay, special revenue funds. So special revenue funds are used to account for financial resources that are restricted to specific purposes or otherwise required to be accounted for in a separate fund. So special revenue funds give us an opportunity to be transparent. It doesn't get mixed up with everything else. We can easily track it. We can show users what revenues are coming in and what revenues that we're expending. It's, revenues and expenditures when we budget have to equal each other. And we always hope that we don't expend more revenues than we bring in. It's happened on a couple occasions. I think one last year, we maybe were over $218 in one of our programs. So, it's not a huge deal. But it does provide for better accountability and transparency. So the special revenue funds, we have Parks and Recreation. And I think everybody knows, that covers Parks and Recreation. All of our different parks, they do the maintenance on those. We have all the events. We have the classes and the programming that Parks does so well. We have a grants fund, and we use that to track most of the grants that come into the city, but we also use it to track other expenses, other programs that we want to have high transparency on, or to track programs where we have revenues that are coming in that will be offset by expenditures. We don't necessarily do that in all of our other funds. We may have one fund program in one revenue program in a fund and a bunch of expenditure programs. That's what we have in the general fund, for example. All of our revenues come into one area and then gets allocated out. With grants, revenues come in, helps us track expenditures that go out. A lot of our grants, too, we get paid on a reimbursement basis, so we expend them first, and that helps us track what we need to ask for reimbursement. So grants are really for tracking purposes. We have the building department. We have risk management. We have transit, economic development, capital replacement. Capital replacement is our equipment replacement, another name for it. So the different programs, if fire is saving up for a fire truck, they're going to have the money saved in this capital replacement fund. That way it doesn't get mixed into their other operating revenues. Set aside, they can track it, it can build year over year so that they can build up a pool of money in order to buy whatever equipment is they want to build or buy.
Mr. Chair? With those capital replacement, they're in the capital replacement fund, but they're separate for each department that has it. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, so this last budget cycle, we changed that. It used to all be grouped together in one program, and it got a little confusing for departments and honestly for finance also. So we broke those down into individual programs. So there's not only a program for each department for their equipment replacement, but also for their IT equipment replacement. So if we need to buy new computers, we can get into that and buy new computers from it, and it doesn't affect our other operating costs.
Okay. And what about the risk management? I know years and years ago, the Pepsi Fund was in the risk management for some reason. So now what's in there?
So we still have risk management. We pay, for example, litigation fees for like the CH2M Hill out of risk management, and then we get backfilled from the sewer department for those types of things. We also, in risk management, have some smaller, we have a PERS. We have a PERS reserve that is in there, so if rates start to go up, we can help smooth those. So we are hoping to get those, get some reserves in place to help if we have something catastrophic happen.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. My question is capital replacement. So the fire department needs a new fire truck. Is that coming out of this fund, or is it part of their? Is it accounted for in their budget? Does that make sense?
It should come out of their capital replacement.
But
And
it's,
so each department will look at their capital needs,
okay,
and as one of their central service charges is they'll put money from their operating budget into this capital replacement budget so that it'll build it up like a savings account, and then once they need it, they can use that.
okay, thank you.
Both police and fire and
Public Works.
public works all do that.
They all do that. And each department has an IT equipment replacement also.
Okay.
You know, computers only last so long, so, you know, eventually we have to replace everything.
Well, does that also include the annual subscriptions for different softwares?
Good question.
Not at this point. Right now, it depends. So one of the things that we have done in this last budget cycle is if there is something that is going to be citywide, like servers, something like that, it's going to get charged out to everybody, and we have that in their central services fund. If, for example, I really want an Adobe subscription on my PC, then I will pay for that out of I could pay for it out of my IT equipment replacement, or I could just pay for it out of software. It kind of depends on what you're looking at in terms of cost. You know, I can eat an Adobe subscription out of my budget, but if I have to replace 5 computers, I'm not going to want to do that. I would use my IT equipment replacement budget to do that.
One more. Okay, so each department, when their computers get close to dying, do we still have the bulk purchase rather than, okay, the IT's got this, or fire has this, so that we get the best bang for our buck?
What we'll do is we would contact IT and say, hey, we need 5 new computers, and they will have somebody say, okay, I'm going to order those for you, and then give us your money. So they are very helpful when it comes to IT.
But this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I think I understand your question.
Yeah.
Is it centrally managed to recognize economies of scale? And IT does do that. They try to replace not one off, one here, one there. They try to do them in a fleet, not necessarily all at the same time, but they try to keep a good grip on the service life. With IT, it's different. It's not like a building or a car, because the computer will keep working. It's just in terms of its effectiveness with other software, it starts to go down. So they keep a track of that.
Great.
And I would ask Gina to address perhaps the chair had asked about software, I guess, or services. So when you talk about Tyler and Munis, we acquired that, but we do also have to pay a subscription for that service, correct?
Correct. And so Tyler is one of those that is getting paid out of the Central Services Administration. We have to have it to operate. So it's not like it comes from finance, but we have it in our Central Services Fund to pay for it out of there.
Okay. We have another question over here, Marilyn.
Yeah. What often comes up at budget committee meetings is the balance in the building fund from building permits. It comes and goes up and down and up and down, and sometimes it's pretty substantial. Can you explain how those building permit fees are restricted?
Building permit fees, those revenues can only be used for building activities. We can't use them for anything else in the city. One of the things that building has done, just because of those ups and downs, is they actually have some reserves in place that are called funds for future use, future years. They can't touch those now. Those are still within the budget. I mean, it's still within their budget, but they're unappropriated. So they are just saving those so that if next biennium we see a shortfall in building and they're not getting the revenues that they need, that they could use those funds at that time. So it's a very smart way. It's a newer way of budgeting for those, but it's for future use.
And the future use would include making sure that we have the staff to cover the downtime so we still are keeping up with building inspections and all of the other services unrelated to issuing permits.
Exactly. It can be used for anything that building would normally be able to spend funds on.
So we don't lay off a bunch of people because we're not getting a lot of building permits in, and then we would fall behind. And so
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of a nifty way of saving money because it's almost like a bank account that you have to, jump through an awful lot of hoops for. And because it's unappropriated and there are very specific restrictions around the funds reserved for future use, it doesn't even show up really. I mean, they're not going to be able to use those funds until a future year. So, when they're actually budgeted.
thank you.
It's like an escrow account, basically, right?
Pardon me?
It's like an escrow account.
It's similar to an escrow account, yeah. Yeah, it's still sitting out there. It's still gathering interest. It's still, it's just not usable right now.
Other questions? Line there? Nope. Okay.
Okay, so other ones are streets and then the public safety levy. And as I talked about before, the public safety levy, we're using that for transparency. It's a little bit different than it used to be. When we first went out for a public safety levy, it was tied to certain positions. It's no longer tied to certain positions. It's just tied to the general operation of police and fire and ambulance. But we transfer those funds into the general fund, into there's specific programs for fire public safety levy and police public fire safety, or police public safety levy. So that's how we get those funds into the general fund to be used by police and fire.
Gina, I'm sorry. Was that, okay, so we've changed it because I know when it first passed, there was the park ranger in it. I mean, and it was dedicated for that. So as it renewed, is that when the language changed? I mean, I can't imagine we could just change it out of the blue.
It's when we went out for a new local option levy. And it actually wasn't the last time we did that. It's been that way for a couple of cycles.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Jesse, I think your mic is on.
Other questions? Seeing none?
Okay, so special revenue funds, some of the revenue sources, intergovernmental, so federal, state, and local. The streets fund gets a lot of money from the state and gas taxes. Well, okay, so not a lot of money. They get funding from the state in gas taxes. Especially in the grants fund, you're going to see revenues come in there. ARPA funds we tracked in the grant funds. CARES funding we tracked in the grants fund. There's a lot of different monies that we receive in for fire. Their ground emergency medical transport, that's where we track it, is in the grants fund. So you'll see a lot of those intergovernmentals there. We also have some property taxes, especially this special, the public safety levy, special revenue fund gets all of its funding from property taxes, so some minor investment interest. Building fees and permits. We talked about those other resources. We have some smaller things. We have charges for service, which I think is, I'm not seeing on here. Is there? There we go.
Gina, just to clarify, some of the intergovernmental things like federal and state building fees and permits and service charges, those are very narrowly defined in where those revenues come in and go to, so that they're not just a general, oh, we need $10 over here, so we're going to take it from this service fee that just happens to be coming in this week. So they're very pointed. Am I correct?
You are correct. That is one of the things about government, is that we receive revenues that are very restricted to certain purposes and have to be used only for those purposes. And that's where the special revenue funds come in, because it allows us to put those revenues into a fund that can be used for expenditures for the purposes that they were intended to be used for. and we can track it that way. So we talked about building just a moment ago. Building funds, building revenues can only be used for building related activities. We couldn't use building funds to support police and fire. Even if we wanted to, we can't do that. So it's one of those areas that I know a lot of people get confused about, but no, they're very restricted, when you're looking at grants too. Even within a department, they're very, very limited on what they can be used for. We recently received the grant that we had in the supplemental that's going to be used for homeless, unhoused, what were some of the other ones?
Housing insecurity.
Housing security, yes.
Housing insecurity.
So it's very specific. It can only be used for those types of activities. So we track that in our grant program so that we can show that the revenues came in and what those expenditures were.
The city has to provide reports to the grantor to show use of funds. Is that correct?
Correct. I just recently submitted our report for ARPA funds and what we were committing those to, what we had actually expended so far, and I get to do that annually. So, but there are other reporting requirements for, I know the GEMT monies that we receive in, there is quite a lot of work that goes into that they have to show, the different runs that they've done and how they've transported, and just a lot of work. And so then we finally can get reimbursed for those.
Okay. Thank you.
So, other resources, again, those are some of the smaller ones. There are some transfers in. We don't see a lot of those, but for example, economic development will transfer funds to parks for the trolley or to parks maintenance for Monteith House. So because those are going between different funds, we have to do them as transfers.
Another question has come up, Mayor.
Yes. I've been having conversations with a lot of people, other mayors, other state officials about Measure 110. There's this huge bucket of money that's being held on to or parsed out very lightly. Have we received any of those dollars would it be in this fund it would go into, or would it be going to a grant fund?
I haven't seen anything from that yet. I don't know if Peter has more information on it.
I don't think those funds are coming to us. I think they're going to services that provide mental health care. It could potentially, I would think, be used to help, like with the position you just approved, mental health service provider, but not for many of our existing programs and funds. Okay. But I haven't heard details on that, so it's tough to comment with any definitive.
Yeah, I was told they're going to start releasing funds. I just haven't seen. I didn't know if we'd received any or was any earmarked for us as a city. But thank you. I appreciate it.
The city attorney might be able to comment on when citations are issued for $100. They also provide an 800 number where people can call for diversion treatment. Mm-hmm. And who that's funded by, I think that's partially supposed to be funded by Measure 110 resources. Okay. So, and I don't know if Sean knows any details about that.
So, Mayor, what exactly was the question? I know what Peter's answering there, but are you asking? Peter, are you asking where the money is going? That the $100 is going? Or?
No, as far as the money that's been collected.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this big bucket of money somewhere that's been taken in since Measure 110 started, and it was supposed to be for mental health treatment, drug treatment, and was this has the city of Albany received any of those funds?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, not through our office. Obviously, we haven't been notified that the city was having any coming, as opposed to like the pharmaceutical settlement that we spoke about before. So I haven't been advised of that at all. The $100, where that money or where that program was funded by, I think eventually it was going to be funded some with 110, but I don't think that it started that way. And my understanding is it hasn't been super successful. The very few people have paid the $100.
Right.
So I don't think they're actually bringing in money that way either. So yeah, I don't. But I haven't been notified that we have any of that money from Measure 110 coming in.
You know,
Mayor,
I asked because we have the mental health court that Judge Reed is running,
Mhm.
and that money would be ideal to support that initiative through
We
the
could
city.
because we have our contracted defense attorney who handles all those cases as part of his job too. So yeah, it would be something that who knows? I mean, maybe there's another position funded through the city that way with some of that grant money. I don't know. We could check with mental health over at Lynn County Mental Health to see if they've had any, if they've heard anything, or if they're going to be getting any of that money. They think, but it seems like that would be a good place for it. Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, that's a good point too, that remember, we don't have a Department of Health. That's the county function. So I would imagine that those monies would be distributed through county health departments to provide mental health care.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you, but I just want to find out, so people in Albany buy those products that bring that revenue in, how much of that's coming back to the city for our services? We have mental health court, we have police officers that deal with those incidences, and I'd like to know where that money's going. So if it's just going to Lynn County and people in Albany are paying that, then what part of that money from Lynn County is coming for our services? Yes, we don't have mental health, but we do have a court that's working, that's providing results. So I would like to know that. So, okay. Thank you, Jenny. Peter.
And seeing no other hands raised for questions right now, please
Okay.
continue, Gina.
So special resources are another revenue type that we get, and those are very unusual and very infrequent. It may be a property sale. It may be, that's the one I can really think of as like a property sale. So we don't have those very often. Okay, next we have debt service funds, and those are used to account for financial resources related to governmental debt-related payments. One of the things we learned in the last few years, which was really interesting to me as an accountant, is that our general obligation debt service, which is the bonds that we put out for the public safety buildings, and we collect those payments from property taxes for that, has to be tracked in its own fund. That's how specific the state can get. We used to have all of our debt service in one fund, and they said, nope, general obligation has to be in its own. So we changed that. The debt service that we currently have is we have a PERS pension obligation bond that we're still paying for, and different departments contribute to make those payments. We had revenue bonds that were recently paid off by Parks and Rec. And so I think we're down to just the one, in terms of the debt service fund, we're down to one loan or one bond in debt service, and then we have the public safety building in our general obligation. And, those are very specific. Revenues that come in for those need to be used to pay that debt. We pay the principal, we pay the interest. It does gather interest, so we do use that too. And anytime we can reduce the amount that we have to ask the county for, we will do that. As I said, departmental contributions, property tax revenues. Now, the enterprise funds have their own debt service programs. So for sewer debt, they have a program that's called sewer debt. Water has one, water debt. And so they pay for their loans and their expenditures out of those. So the Riverfront Interceptor that we put in recently and, got a loan from the state for the DEQ, that's tracked in the sewer fund. And then the Albany Revitalization Agency debt, it's tracked in the CARA program right now. We don't want that necessarily to commingle with our other debt because ERA is actually considered a component unit of the city, has the same board, but that's why we have a separate budget and separate financials for them. We have the Capital Projects Fund, and that's used for major capital-related projects for the general government. You're not going to see enterprise projects in here. You're not going to see Cox Creek Interceptor in here. The public safety buildings were really the last one that I remember tracking in capital projects. And it's used primarily for tracking purposes. It's going to be government. ERA tracks its own. And again, the enterprise funds have their own. So transfers in for the Capital Projects Fund. So when we did the public safety buildings, we received the funds into the debt service program. And then we transferred that money out into the Capital Projects Fund.
Then that leads me to have a question about the CIP that we fall back on when building budgets, because we have, roads and sewers and water lines and storm and all these things. That's not under capital project?
No, like I said, the enterprise funds will do their own. So if you're going to see a street project, it's going to come under streets. They have their own capital program. Water, again, the Cox Creek Interceptor for the sewer fund, you're going to see it there.
All right.
So,
Okay.
Gina,
yes.
this is Ray. Question on ARA funding for, say, the waterfront. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure going on during that, so that's going to be separate from our normal public works infrastructure accounting, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. And then permanent funds. Permanent funds are used to account for endowments. We currently have one permanent fund for library. We have 2 programs within that. We're given money from people. They'll give us $10,000 and say, here's $10,000. You need to save it and you need to spend the interest on these types of books. And we do that. But the money is unappropriated because we can't spend it. We're not legally able to spend it. And that's how we track those types of endowments is in the permanent funds. Proprietary funds. So we just talked about governmental funds. These are the business-like activities of the government. We have enterprise funds where we charge somebody for the product that they're getting from us. So water, sewer, stormwater. We provide them water, we provide sewer services, and they pay us for those. And the intent is that what we charge them covers all of the expenses associated with providing that service to them. So it's total cost recovery.
When you say total cost recovery, does that have a future replacement cost built into it?
It does. They take a look at future projects and they have a formula that they use and they come up with a rate that will hopefully get us where we need to be.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of input that goes into determining what those rates are for those different services. That covers, not only operating, but also future capital.
Okay.
So yeah, the 3 enterprise funds are water, wastewater, stormwater. And these are just some of what the revenues look like. Charges for service, beginning fund balance. You notice beginning fund balance is rather large.
Mhm.
A lot of the balance in our enterprise funds we're saving for future projects. So we have money in reserves. So when it comes to accounting for those, the offset of a reserve is going to be a beginning fund balance in the next year. So you can see these beginning fund balances are probably all really going to show up as reserves in those different funds. And then SDCs is a very small little piece of that. We have some loan proceeds that we bring in, and that would be like the Riverfront Interceptor. Other bigger projects that we've financed will show up as loan proceeds also.
Now, one thing you haven't spoken about is cash flow. And is that what these, and I'm going to say beginning fund balance is one of those things that we use to keep the cash flow, I'm going to say, stable? So, because I know we only get taxes from property taxes once a year. And, it goes up and then we pay it out over time. So is that the idea of this fund?
Well, so when we do our budgeting, what we do is we look at the beginning fund balance in a program. And, whatever is left over, it's revenues minus expenditures at the end of a fiscal year. And then we go in and we say, okay, of this beginning fund balance, how much of that needs to be in reserves? So we may put it into a reserve, an operating reserve. We may put it into a capital reserve. We may put it into a contingency reserve. And then we determine how much of that beginning fund balance we want to spend. So we can spend beginning fund balance as it comes when we have it, along with other revenues that are coming in. But a lot of times, especially in these funds, we're kind of sitting on those reserves because, like the Cox Creek Interceptor, the next phase after this one that we complete, it's going to be expensive. And so we want to have our, we want to try to cash flow it as much as possible so we're not having to go out and get debt for it.
Okay. All right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I understood what you were saying. So.
Okay. If somebody didn't understand and you want to know, please ask.
I
Okay.
do have one question, Gina.
Oh,
Okay, someone said that we only receive property taxes once a year. Do we not receive them when the third payments are due, or is it just once a year? I can't
Well,
remember.
we get property taxes. We get the bulk of it in the
Right,
November
November.
timeframe, October, November. It does trickle in after that. So we will get a small amount.
Okay.
It usually really drops off, late spring. And then we just kind of wait and see what we're going to get for the next fiscal
Yeah,
year.
because the people that pay on the trimester payment plan, I think it's February and June or something like that, February, May. So, yeah, I figured that we had got some additional, not just in November. Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Seeing none, please.
Okay, so then we also have the internal service funds, which come under our proprietary. And these are used to account for activities that provide goods and service primarily to other departments within the city. So central services, we have administration, finance. I couldn't find a good picture for city manager's office, so I just used Peter. Information technology, human resources, and building maintenance. And we do things with the public, in finance. We handle assessments, we handle payments that come into the city, we handle insurance type things. But really, what we exist for is to help with other departments. Not every, if you have public works, they don't necessarily have a human resources. They can't afford to have their very own human resources staff and their very own accountant and their very own IT person, so you're looking at economies of scale again, but we provide those services. We partner with those departments to provide those services for them so they can do the jobs that they need to do and they don't have to worry about getting somebody paid, or they don't necessarily have to worry about getting a debt service payment out the door. We can take care of that for them.
Example of something that serves all city departments by finance is payroll.
Exactly. Payroll is a big one. IT, maintaining all the servers that we use and the software that we use. So, that's our primary responsibilities to other departments, even though we also serve the public.
Okay.
And the way that we're funded is we allocate costs to departments using a variety of methods. So, for example, in human resources, they just use the number of FTE. So if you're a small department like court, where you have, I think they have 6 people, they're going to pay, pretty small percentage of the human resources budget. If you have somebody like police, where they have a much larger, that portion's going to be bigger for them. For the city manager's office, we use the operating budget of the different departments. There's not really a good way of saying who uses their services the most, so we just base it on operating budgets. Accounts payable, Sherry, who's our accounts payable specialist, will go out and she looks at the number of invoices each department has used, each program has used, and then we allocate those expenses based on that, the number of invoices for each of them. Code enforcement. So we moved code enforcement to central services. Christian Dill is in his very own program, and he is funded by the departments that use him. So police help fund him, fire, parks, those, pardon me, library may be a small part, but he's funded by those programs, and every budget period we'll go through and we'll have him reassess and take a look at, the percentage of the time that he uses for each of those different programs and then allocate appropriately. Public Works Central Services Fund, very similar to the Central Services Fund, but it's geared towards the Public Works, the different departments in Public Works. So they have administration, engineering, customer service, operations administration, facilities maintenance and engineering, and water quality control. Honestly, I'm not that familiar with each of these, so I had to reach out to their business manager, Jeff Babbitt, to give me some information. So Public Works admin, it's allocated to all Public Works operating programs based on their operating and maintenance budgets. It's kind of like our operating budget for city manager's office. Public Works engineering, they do track with project numbers what they're working on. So then each month, the Public Works accountant will go in and allocate those expenses to each of the departments that actually use them, whether it's water, streets, building, whoever happens to use those. Operations admin, again, it's based on budget. Water quality control, direct charges for services by hourly rates. So they track those through project accounting and their timesheets. They can add a project code on there. Customer services, that's utility billing. And so because of we have water, sewer, stormwater, and city services fee all show up on the utility bills, each of those different programs help contribute to the costs of running utility billing. And it's based on the operating programs. So almost like on the revenues. If we're expecting to bring in $5 million in revenues over the biennium, and stormwater is expected to bring in a couple million, we're going to pay, city services fee is going to pay a little bit more than the stormwater is. And then facilities maintenance and engineering, and that's also tracked through timesheets and project accounts. The Urban Renewal Agency Fund, which is, we do track. Yeah.
We have a question.
Before you move on from Public Works, I didn't see anything about the airport. Is that under facilities, or where's that located?
So the airport actually falls under economic development.
Really?
Yes. It's in the Public Works Department, but it's tracked under economic development.
Okay, thank you. You have time for a break?
I think we've been at it for about an hour, so.
I'm almost done.
Oh, okay.
If that,
You're almost done? Okay.
I mean, there's only a few slides left
Okay.
Okay.
if you want to move forward, but either way, I'm fine.
Everybody, anybody want to stop for a break, or let's push forward?
When you're done, is it just questions after that, or do we
Yes.
have a whole, okay, well then, I can.
And you
All right.
push forward.
Let's continue
Okay.
forward.
Okay, so the Urban Renewal District, or the TIF, the Tax Incremental Funding District. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that, but what they do is they identify a district that needs some help. Oops, can I go back too far? Okay, here we go. So areas that are physically deteriorated, economically stagnated, unsafe, or where the old urban layout no longer works. As I said, we also refer to these as TIF districts. So here in Albany, the Albany Revitalization Agency is the overarching agency. The board made up our city council, same members of our city as our city council. And then the Central Albany Revitalization Area is our existing TIF district. If the city were interested and the era were interested, they could go out and they could create a new TIF district. On our charter, though, it requires a vote to do that, but so we're not close to that yet. But, it is an option. We don't have to have just one. There are communities around us that have many.
When we were looking at doing the Pepsi project, they were going to have a zone that was going to collect monies. Is that similar to a TIF? I'm not sure. I can't remember.
Enterprise?
I guess it was an enterprise.
Yeah, it would be
A
similar.
local improvement district or something?
It would be similar to that, not quite the same as an economic improvement district, because in this case, we're not having people give us funding out of their own pocket. So what we're doing is we are freezing taxes at a certain rate. So if today we were to go out and we were going to identify a district, we would say, okay, what taxes get paid right now? And we freeze them there. Any increases in the revenues would go into the new district. So that's what we do with CARA is that, I think it was 2003 that we started CARA, somewhere in there.
2001.
And so at that point, those taxes were frozen. And then any additional revenues go to this district. The increment, yes. Yep.
Mhm.
And it's used to promote the redevelopment. And then we also get some miscellaneous revenues in there. We have investment interest that comes in, and we get like sale of property, or maybe we've made a loan to somebody and they're paying that back. So the one thing about the district is that they have a certain amount of indebtedness. It's called their maximum indebtedness that they can use for this. With the recent funding that we went out for, we're using 15 million of that. So that 15 million is considered then the use of that indebtedness. When we pay that back, those payments don't count. So it really is just those expenses that are used for the redevelopment in the area. I'm sure if you wanted more information, Seth would be happy to provide that to you because he knows it inside and out.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
you may be referring to enterprise zones. Was that,
Mm-hmm.
you asked if there was another zone that was surrounding the Pepsi effort?
An enterprise zone. There was also they called it a district, and I can't remember the
It's
rest.
called local improvement.
We
Yeah,
do have an
a lit.
economic improvement district
Yes.
in the downtown area.
Mhm.
And we go out for a district every 5 years. And business owners, it's for commercial only, business owners can have the option to opt out of that program. Otherwise, they're in it for 5 years. And it's a relatively small amount, but that money we collect and then we distribute to the Albany Downtown Association for projects in that economic improvement district area.
All right. A little bit different in each one, the way you're.
Everything is
money.
different, yeah.
Okay.
So really, that's the end of what I had. So I told you the truth. There was only a few more slides.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
I've been asking mine the whole time, so.
I could ask one. With
Okay.
our outside agencies, ADA, AVA, we get apparently we get reports every year or something. But what's the other one? The Transit and Lodging Tax Committees and stuff like that. And I just wondered. Okay, we used to, as a budget committee, decide that or at least put input into it. And now it's not. So are they just set? And I mean, because we haven't not had anything to say for years. So I just wondered about that. Thanks.
No, the budget committee still has, that's about $2 million in a biennium, right? out of a $350 million budget. And the Budget Committee certainly will look at that, the proposed expenditures. And as long as the city pays its legally required minimum on tourism promotion, then the council can decide where they have discretion to decide where they want to spend the rest of the money. And they even have discretion about where they can spend the tourism promotion. It's just subject to restrictions that must be spent on tourism promotion.
And that's pretty, kind of like a wide scope, isn't it?
Well, there are a lot of things that you can do in the tourism promotion world, right? Right now, as you intimated, AVA takes care of a lot of that for us, right? But there are other ways that you could do that. But the AVA has been doing a good job for the city. And then the balance of that it's 44% that's required to be spent on tourism promotion. So the balance, the 56%, you can spend as you see fit. Some of it goes to police, some of it goes to fire, a lot of it goes to economic development. That's how we primarily fund our economic development services and will fund the development of a strategy. So, but the Budget Committee does see that when it comes through.
Question over here. Go ahead.
We have a committee that gives us recommendations as how much we spend for different parts.
Yeah.
Money.
Yes, they look at the proposed budget and there's not their individual expenditures that they have every year are reviewed by the TLT Commission. But there's also a policy which talks about how those monies should be spent. And as a matter of fact, in the economic development world, that policy is being updated, and you'll see that sometime soon as well.
So will we hear from that committee before we talk about budget again?
It's kind of up to the committee's chairman. If they want to come and give a report to the council, they can certainly do that.
Okay.
Can we
I'll add that question. I'll relay that to them.
Yep, facts.
Matilda?
Yeah, I was just going to say, can we request that the TLT committee give us a report so we know what's going on?
Sure. Yeah, you
And-
can request that of any of your committees.
Okay, and I want to make sure I understood you clearly. With the TIF district, there's a minimum, you said 44%. Can we,
The TIF is a tool, tax increment financing, that's used to fund projects within an urban renewal district. That's one thing. What
Right.
we were talking about now is simply transient
TLT,
lodging tax.
yeah.
And the requirement in state law that a city, a municipality spend a certain percentage of its transient lodging tax revenues on tourism promotion.
right, so my question is, thanks for helping it settle back into my head, is the state requires a certain, 44% minimum. We can go above that if we so choose?
Absolutely.
Thank
You could
you.
spend the entire amount on that if you wanted to.
Thank you.
And interestingly, it's different in each city. That 44% is only here in Albany. Other cities
I have a
are
question
less
for
or
Councilor
more.
Johnson.
Well, I think-
Okay.
And I think we currently spend about 70% on
We
on
do.
tourism.
We do. I was going to say, Peter's right. Our calculation, I'm not sure if it's 44, 46, something like that, we've determined that the city is required to spend on tourism-related expenses. I think year in and year out, we've been spending about 70%. And I think Seth would tell you when he comes, if he were coming in or when he does a presentation, that we are spending, and Gina may know this too, we're about spending double what the next closest city in Oregon
Wow.
is spending on tourism promotion right now. So yeah, but it varies. It varies on the amount of money we collect. So if we collect $10 one year, we're gonna spend $7 on tourism. If we collect 10 million, we're gonna spend $7 million on tourism. So it's just
we're not.
depends on what we can collect.
Thank you. And
Mayor had a
I have a question for Councilor Johnson. The chair of the the TLT committee is your appointee. Can you ask them for a report or an update from us? To us?
I can't remember who it is.
Keith Loesch?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we approach the end of this. Are there any other questions? Ray, any questions? Jared, any questions?
I'm good.
All right. And our group up here, another one.
Yeah.
Nicole?
So this is not a question. I just wanted to say that I agree with our city manager that as far as on that last subject matter, the TLT. I agree that the AVA does a really nice job with what we give them, whether it's, a larger amount or a smaller amount. I've always been really pleased with what they do and the way they keep the council updated every month with what's going on and, what they're doing and how they're promoting us. So I just wanted to say that for the record. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, with that, another question? Go ahead.
When do we want that report?
They haven't had a meeting since February, so
Do we want it like toward the end of the year?
so when do we have to approve the supplemental budget?
You just did a supplemental budget. There, the TLT Commission will meet again in August, I believe.
So
So-
after that meeting.
Okay.
And it'd be nice if the different boards and commissions come to us. It'd be nice to see all of them at one point, at least once during the year. It'd be nice.
Chairman,
Yes, sir. Dick?
I see all of the city council people here, either in person or on the screen, but I only see 2 budget committee members.
Well,
Are there vacancies that need to be filled?
well, they're fully staffed.
Were they all notified that there was a meeting today?
Everybody was notified. I thought we had more than just 2.
Oh, Jesse Brenneman's online on the phone.
There's, yeah.
I know
Maybe they're online.
my appointee's here, Mr. Hanson. He's online.
I think they were just showing where we had video. They were on phone. They weren't showing up on the.
Wanted to be in.
Maybe they're
Jesse right
just
here.
shy.
Chris Hansen, they're all there. That's Jesse Brenneman there. MAR, Mr. Who's RB?
And that way, the folks that had video showing could wave at me and I could see them
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah, that's Chris Hansen right there.
Okay.
So I have just one question. Can you send us a copy to the budget committee of this, please?
Absolutely.
Okay,
It'll be
well-
included in the minutes also.
So will you field questions after this, during the week?
Yes, Mr. Chair, may I suggest that this is, for all intents and purposes, the start of the kickoff of the budget build for the next
Okay.
biennium. So we will be working closely with the Budget Committee along the way. So I mentioned in the beginning that we have another 2 meetings near the end of this year. But in the meantime, if any Budget Committee member would like to get together and talk about if they have any questions or concerns, either Gina or myself would be happy to sit down with them and answer those questions.
Excellent.
I should warn you, though, that I love to talk about budget. So if somebody comes and talks to me, you may be there for a while. We may just need to go out for coffee or something.
Okay. Well, any other comments, questions? Seeing none, we've ended this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.